Hello and welcome to Alta Live. Welcome, everyone. Takes a couple of minutes for the crowd to fill into the room today. Welcome to our Zoom room. Welcome to Alta Live. We're here today to discuss whether or not, and really argue why the Oscars, the Academy Awards, are obsolete. Welcome. Today's guest is Will Self. He's here to detail, with his world famous wit and wisdom, why the Academy Awards are obsolete. In fact, he wrote about this for the latest issue of Alta Journal. Will is the author of 25 books, some of which have been translated into 25 languages. His latest is the memoir, Will. We're actually going to send you a link to Will's work, his website, where you can buy his book. He's also a prolific journalist in the UK, where he is based, as well as throughout the world. He holds the chair in contemporary thought at Brunel University, and he cannot stand the Academy Awards. So we're delighted to welcome him today. Before we begin chatting with Will, some brief housekeeping. Alta Live is the digital interview series we do here at Alta Journal. My name's Beth Spotswood, and I'm Alta's digital editor. If you are unfamiliar with Alta, we are an award-winning quarterly magazine focused on California and the West. We feature some of the best writers from the West Coast and around the world. In fact, this is Will's second piece for us at Alta. So if you like what we do here today, I hope you'll check us out. Please use the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen to ask your questions for Mr. Self. We'll chat for about 30 minutes and then get to as many of your questions as we can. This video will be recorded and posted to altaonline.com later today. To get started, please let us know where you're zooming in from here in the chat. I am in Novato, California, just north of San Francisco. Will, where are you this evening?
As you can probably see from the darkness outside my windows, I'm in a radically different time zone. I'm in London, England, where it's 8:30 in the evening.
We're really hitting all the coasts. We've got Hawaii tuning in, Florida, New Jersey, West London, Philadelphia, Toronto. It's great to see such a big crowd. I'm curious if all of you guys watch the Oscars, as the ratings have plummeted in recent years. So Will, my first question for you is, when did you first watch the Oscars and what did you think?
Well, I've got to be frank. I'm an Anglo-American, so I'm like I have frankness in my DNA. I can honestly say I've probably only watched the show a couple of times in my life through. I'm not a huge fan of that kind of thing at all. I tend to think pets win prizes, and it's never been, I think what throughout my adult lifetime, what I've seen is in some ways prizes have become more important because people trust the gatekeepers of culture even less. So there's been this kind of strange countervailing tendency where on the one hand, people have paid perhaps more attention to the Oscars because other traditional gatekeepers of culture have fallen into disrepute than they would have, say, 25 or 30 years ago. So they had a kind of cachet. But I think that in recent years, they've really had very little to recommend them. And I have to speak my truth. Looking at a lot of highly paid show ponies cavorting around on a red carpet is not my idea of entertainment.
One of the arguments you make in your article is the Titanic in 1998, which I think you refer to it as schlock, won 11 Academy Awards. To that extent, you argue that the Oscars have lost credibility. They are no longer the benchmark for cinematic excellence, but rather something to be campaigned for, purchased to some extent. Go ahead, sorry.
No, I think if they ever were, I think you could go right back to the kind of Hotel Roosevelt and the very first ceremonies. Or, the other night I was watching the 1948 Judy Garland Star is Born, which of course starts with this incredible scene of the warm-up act when the Oscars were held at the Shriners Auditorium in downtown LA, of this Oscars ceremony being disrupted by a drunk James Mason. So And what you got at that point, you could see a kind of deconstruction of the idea of the awards ceremony going on. That's over 70 years ago. Hollywood's been able. I mean, I have to say, what I love about Hollywood, as much as I dislike Hollywood, is it's always had a capacity to satirize itself and see itself for how nefarious and kind of venal it really is. So, you know, thumbs up for Hollywood on that front. The Titanic, I think I say in the piece that, you know, the Titanic is often said to be the world's biggest metaphor. But in the case of the Titanic winning all the Oscars, it was an award for the biggest metaphor in that way. And yes, you know, recently, the recent scandals that surround the idea, you know, the impact, and let's make no bones about it, the kind of derelictions in terms of the recognition of talent, you know, whether it be women or people from minority communities, has been egregious in terms of the Academy and in terms of the way that the voting has gone in recent years. And there needed to be a timely corrective to that. Let's make no bones about it. The Academy needed to change. My concern is that neither that nor the original paradigm, which is that kind of success follows finance, and you can somehow possibly influence Academy members into voting for your movie. I mean, I think, again, back to the Titanic, the world's biggest metaphor, and by that reason alone, too big to fail, right? Couldn't be allowed to fail. And you know, I think the problem, and it's perhaps a point that people find hard because this is a very divisive debate. People, you know, the culture war, there can only be two sides and no reinforcements, you know, so to try and stand back from this current, you know, situation and say, the problem is in cinematic art, insofar as it's mainstream and commercial, there is no entering into that area without being judged by the dollar sign alone. You know, so you can throw these factors like, you know, trying to get better representation from people from minorities or women. You can throw that, you can say more kind of expression of people with, you know, different sexualities or, you know, intersex people, whatever you want to say. It doesn't matter. All of those categories then mesh with the existent Oscar categories to create a new way of judging things within the marketplace. Are they fungible? Will they sell? Can they be traded? And I think you see it with this year's list again.
Well, this year's list is notable in that so many of the films have not been financially successful, although Hollywood seems to kind of be, you know, we are no longer, as you put it, we're taking back kind of control of the way that we consume film. And so Hollywood is we're no longer sitting in theaters paying $14 or $20 to watch Titanic or Good Will Hunting or whatever. We get to stream it from home. I saw Nomadland at home. I'm curious if you think that there's any cinematic award right now that genuinely honors real talent, that really gives the award for the best picture or one of the best pictures, that nails it.
Well, I think the Palme d'Or has a better record in Cannes of identifying the best movie of the year than the Oscars best picture. Yeah, on the whole. And I think even its sort of, you know, geopolitical location in the land of cheese-eating surrender monkeys makes it more balanced in terms of world cinema than the West Coast. You know, what an interesting list this year. You know, you have this picture at the heart of it that is about the American heartlands, but both the leading men aren't American and the director is from New Zealand, you know, or Australia rather, Jane Campion. So, you know, it's a bit like a weird inversion of the way that the original Hollywood moguls were largely Central European refugee Jews, who then kind of created an idea of America that they repackaged to the American heartland. Maybe we've come full circle in some way, and America can only palatably absorb the reality of its own culture by having it depicted by foreigners. So I think that's strange.
Well, interestingly, on the kind of in the exact reverse, today's headline, there's a headline in today's San Francisco Chronicle in the arts and culture section. Kristen Stewart's Best Actress Oscar nomination is a travesty. There's the American playing Brit, particularly Princess Diana, who's, beloved. You could only screw it up, really. First of all, did you see Spencer, and what did you think?
No, I didn't. I mean, I'm a Republican of the English variety, so the royal family are a bit of an anathema to me, though I did watch The Crown, I have to say. And watching The Crown, I became not a royalist, but a foyalist. I loved Claire Foy in the role of the Queen, and hated it when Olivia Colman took over. I'm sorry.
Did.
I'm so fed up with Olivia Colman. I'm so over Olivia Colman. I'm sorry.
Oscar nominee Olivia Colman.
I'm so over it.
Well, they say that the surefire way to win an Oscar is to play someone famous, someone ill, my left foot, or someone crazy.
Yeah.
And they kind of nailed three of those with
it's a bit like there's an English humorist called Alan Coren who once published a book called Golfing for Cats and put a swastika on the cover, because he'd figured out the books about the Nazis, cats, and golf were the highest selling. So, I mean, there's a kind of abject cynicism in that. I suppose the nominee that comes in like that is my close cognomen, Will Smith, with his portrayal of the Williams sisters' father and coach. And that seems like a kind of worthy biopic movie. It's in there for ballast. But really, the list to me this year seems like a kind of awkward compromise on all fronts.
How do you mean?
Well, it's an attempt to kind of honor big, you've got the big spectacle film, Denis Villeneuve's Dune. You've got this doggy film about Montana in the 1920s, curiously, with hard-bitten ranchers played by nice young men from North London. And you have to think, I have no idea what Drive My Car is doing on this list at all. A film that was as boring as watching brown paint dry. And
it's interesting that you see so many of them, though.
I've seen Dune. Drive My Car, I saw half of. I fell asleep. And I haven't seen the doggy Montana one. No, I've only seen Dune. Dune, I thought was frankly, everybody loved it. I'm somebody who read the Frank Herbert book when I was 12 several times. I was an obsessive. I know it backwards. I loved the David Lynch adaptation. I'm sorry, I don't think Villeneuve brings much to the party apart from the effects.
Fascinating. Now, do you think that the Oscars, it's interesting, I don't know if you listened to the New York Times Daily podcast where they had this kind of great explanation of what happened to the Golden Globes and why it went from the most kind of silly, fun, wild night in Hollywood to no longer even televised, basically due to a bribery scandal, due to a number of issues certainly that have come up in Hollywood, like Oscar So White, Me Too, Harvey Weinstein being a rapist. But it was namely that the voters were taking like teeth whitening kits and trips to Vegas and whatever, that essentially canceled the Golden Globes for all intents and purposes. Do you think that the Oscar is on a slower demise, or is there any chance of redemption for either the ceremony or the award itself?
Well, I think the two are in lockstep. And it's what you said before, Beth. I mean, the pandemic only brought to the fore tendencies that have been going on over the last decade. 10 or 12 years ago, I was spending quite a bit of time in LA, and I was talking to people in the industry much more. And at that time, if you remember, it was the writers' strike, and the strike was over residuals, and the strike was over residuals that were to do with DVD markets and other kind of markets that essentially gave the consumer control over what they wanted to watch. And streaming is only the latest and strongest iteration of a process that really began with television back in the late 40s and 1950s. So in the sense, in that sense, Hollywood's been on life support for a long time as the dominant forum for the world's dominant narrative entertainment medium. It's had, it's been given notice many, many times. This time, I think it's in intensive care. And I think there's a big problem. And I think, I confidently predict that the ceremony will gather massively less viewers even than last year.
Really?
Yeah, I confidently predict. If I'm wrong, I'll be confidently wrong. But I think it. I don't think people. I mean, you might argue, well, maybe post-pandemic, people will want to see people out in their glad rags. They'll want to sit in front of their TV. They'll want to make an occasion of it. I wonder. We're pretty beaten by the last couple of years of all of this. And in a way, our control over our own viewing and our own critical estimation of what we view is the only thing that we've gained. So we might all celebrate by just turning off again.
Do you think for someone, I will admit in 1998, I was 20 years old. I was a college sophomore who thought that the Titanic was the most powerful experience that I've ever had in a movie theater. I'm now a 44-year-old jaded mother. But I wonder, is there something to be said? Is there value in that, just having fun with it, particularly the ceremony, the moments of Roberto Benigni jumping over the seats to accept his Oscar for Life is Beautiful, that Cuba Gooding Jr., who kind of never did anything else, going over the music and jumping up and down. Is there something to be said for just having fun?
Well, I hope you're not jaded because you're a mother, but that would be
life has happened. I've grown, I've learned.
Yeah. If you think about it though, the snafus, the kind of boob accidents, the moments of pathos, the speeches, it was said of the Emperor Nero that he kept a little vial in which to cry into it because his sentimentality needed to be preserved for posterity. Those kind of extraordinary, I think Kate Winslet gave one of the most famous weepy Oscars acceptance speeches, that opportunity for thespians to show, that they emote so much more than the rest of us. All of that, if you think about it, only acquires salience and entertainment value in relation to the supposition that Hollywood is Mount Parnassus, is Olympus. The gods really do reside there. Once the gods no longer reside on Hollywood, it's not so amusing or interesting or anything. It lacks that frisson. It lacks that. And so I doubt, again, I confidently predict that nothing that happens at this year's ceremony will really be that amusing, that revelationary, or that moving.
We've gotten a couple of questions wanting your opinion on the BAFTAs.
Yeah, I can't really, you'll have to refresh me. Who won?
We don't watch it over here. I don't even know that it's televised. I regard it as the British Oscars.
Yeah, I mean, I think people felt that it was a reasonable this year. This year it did okay. I mean, it was still staggering from the fallout of a sort of scandal involving a filmmaker called Noel Clarke, who was exposed as being a serial molester of women and was a BAFTA fellow and involved in the judging. That is not unlike the Weinstein scandal. So the BAFTAs has been much overcast by this kind of, I know, negative intersectionality between a prominent male involved in abuse of women and the same issues about a lack of representation of women and minorities in the lineup. I think the consensus was that this year's awards somehow managed to get past that reputational damage, somehow managed to present a reasonable picture of what the British film and television industry are doing. But let me tell you, fireworks were not going off all over London when the winners were announced.
Interesting. Now, do you consider yourself a film lover?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
What was
Yeah.
your if you're in charge, if you're the sole Academy voter, who would you give Best Picture to?
Oh, I would have dedicated this year's 2022 ceremony probably to the films of 1922. It seems to me that this decade is one of the most interesting in cinematic history because it's 100 years since the great decade of silent cinema. And, it's all available. Most of it's available free to stream. And frankly, Goethe, the great German writer and thinker, said when a new medium emerges, most of the things that it's possible to do in that medium will be done by the first pioneers. And if they're geniuses, all of it will be done by the first pioneers. Well, people like Fritz Lang my mind's gone blank, but Richard Asquith, the great directors of the silent era, Buster Keaton, they were geniuses, actually. And they did almost everything that film could do by 1929. I don't think sound added much. So if I were in charge of the Oscars, they'd be like a retro Oscars, and I would do 100-year-old Oscars, and see what you get.
You could, but seriously, 2021.
That's serious.
One present day modern made while we were alive movie blew your mind. Amazing piece of artwork.
I can honestly say that I cannot think of a film. My big problem, and I wrote about it in the piece for Alta, is what film theorists call the tyranny of film. And I think that once you know about the tyranny of film, it really affects your viewing. And the tyranny of film is two phenomena. One is the use of the editing technique of cross-cutting as opposed to any other kind of montage. So, the typical cross-cut is from one moving vehicle to another moving vehicle. And the viewer's assumption is sooner or later these two vehicles are going to meet. And the other factor in the tyranny of film is the steady decrease in shot length. And that's just a real fact. Shot lengths have declined over the past 20 years by a factor of over 50%. And the average shot length now is under 3 seconds in Hollywood film. And the combination of cross-cutting as an editing technique and shorter shot speed is to fixate the viewer's attention on the screen. You have to look at a given point in order to see where the action's going to take you. And it's seen a devastating effect on the main streaming platforms. If you look at almost any drama series produced by Amazon or Netflix, they are perfect exhibits of the tyranny of film. You only have to go back 20 or 25 years, and film has so much more of a spacious feel to it, most film. The difference in the decline in shot speed is instead of your eye being free to move around the frame and investigate it, its attention is compelled the whole time. And it's why, if you think about it, after an evening of Doritos and kind of streaming, your head aches with a kind of tension as if giant hands have been going like this. And that's why. I'm sorry, I mean, you put me on the spot. I'm sure there are many good films that have been made in the past. Well, to give you one, I preferred Villeneuve's Blade Runner to his Dune. I thought it was a more thoughtful and more accomplished film.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Hollywood heartthrob, Ryan Gosling.
Right. Ryan Gosling it's like watching an ironing board act, but he was meant to be a robot. So like that's fine.
You're getting a lot of pushback here. Okay. Okay, I mean,
was always the case.
Is Jane Campion today's David Lean then?
Yeah, she's a brilliant director. I mean, I loved her piano. I followed her career. I remember when her first movie came out, which I'm trying to remember its name. It's called something like Darling. amazing and a definite, original cinematographic vision. She's a great director, and I haven't seen the Campion film yet, so I'll reserve my judgment. It may be absolutely amazing. I don't know. I think she's a really, really important director, and I have to say, I'm 100% pleased to see a woman director nominated for Best Director, and I really hope she gets it. But I hope she gets it justifiably, because the film is great, as not just because she's a woman in that way. Yeah.
Why, if the Oscars are
Oh, by the way, I think she's better than David Lean. She's better. Lean, I tried to watch Dr. Zhivago the other day, and it really is romantic tosh. I mean,
I just love Doritos and Netflix is my takeaway from this entire. I'll be using that for quite a while. If the Oscars are obsolete, why do you hope Jane Campion wins? I mean, should it even matter to Jane Campion, other than it might transform her opportunities to tell more stories and to bring us more of her incredible work?
Yeah, it's a reasonable point. I mean, I think that's a very good point, Beth, because I think the problem is, it used to be said of architecture that form follows function. Now you can say form follows finance, and the same is true for film. And I've known directors at a Hollywood level. I mean, I've seen this quite a bit, and they all say the same thing. They get into a point where they can't contemplate making a film with much less of a budget than the film they made last. So it becomes a kind of economic business in that way. So yeah, I think she's a great director. But yeah, in a way, would we mind if she had a smaller budget? She did an extraordinary series, also set in New Zealand, television series that clearly wasn't at the same budgetary level, but was an amazing series. Why does she have to do big budget Hollywood movies? And why do we have to watch them? I mean, surely the key question here is, are we going back to the movie houses? Are we going back to the theaters? Because it all depends on whether we go back. Because frankly, the justification for the particular mechanics of big budget cinema, I don't think will be there if we keep streaming.
Interesting. Do you think that, considering that we're streaming so much of this, including Campion's film, that the Emmys and Oscars should be combined, or are the Emmys just as obsolete as the Oscars?
I think they'd be wise to try and have a mashup.
We are getting, let's see. Oh, here, since movies are the greatest movies, and the greatest really happened at the dawn of cinema. Can you tell us some of your favorite, who are you reading now? Who recommend us writers, podcasts, online stuff? We got a specific question about absurdists, but who do you think is a fantastic kind of modern content deliverer?
Well, you've caught me out. I mean, I kind of make fictions myself, so I'm usually much involved with producing rather than consuming in that way, and that's probably why I prefer to go to the past than the present. I have watched stuff recently on screen that I admired a lot. The French series Paris Police 1900, set in around the Dreyfus affair in the late 19th century in Paris, is an extraordinary piece of work. I don't know if I think you can get it in the States, but I'm not sure whether you can stream it there. There's only one series as yet. I thought that was superb, beautifully shot, beautifully acted, largely by actors not well known. So that would, I don't know if it's absurdist, unless you think anti-Semitism is absurd, which I certainly don't. But no, I can't really, I am very mired in the past when it comes to film. I've never, my formative experience of watching film was seeing Andrei Tarkovsky's Solaris when I was 12 on cinema release. It was billed as the Soviet 2001. And it completely converted me. And talk about a man who knew how to prolong a shot. That was Tarkovsky. And my big film project of the last year has been producing a shot-by-shot analysis of Tarkovsky's.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So that's what I'm into. And I think with great directors, you feel their persona behind the camera. You know, cinema can be a total artwork in that way. Music, you know, that's a bit of my problem with Denis Villeneuve's Dune, was that I shut my eyes and just listened to the soundtrack for a while. And it just consisted of groaning mechanical noises and high-pitched squeaks. Every scene went, it just sounded absolutely absurd. When I opened my eyes again, I could not be overtaken by the visual majesty because I could just hear this ridiculous soundtrack.
It's interesting how you've mentioned the kind of influence that your childhood, that seeing some of these films or reading a book as a child has still, lo these years later, kind of had such a profound influence. I have to admit, there's certain late 80s, early 90s Oscar moments that for me, for sitting around with my family and celebrating these kind of magical characters, far before there was social media or I was aware of tabloid journalism. I didn't know these people were mired in various scandals or, you know, what have you. They were movie stars in pretty outfits, and exciting to watch. Do you have any interest in kind of detracting people away from that, or from is there any?
No, for heaven's sake, let people have their enjoyment. I get all of that. I think it was after I think the late Carrie Fisher always used to throw a party. I think it was after the Emmys rather than after the Oscars. And one year I happened to be in LA and I got an invite to go along to the party. And, you know, there was so many stars in the room that it was like being in some surrealistic dream. You couldn't, you know, you'd look over and Gina Davis was queuing for the buffet with Jack Nicholson standing up behind you. Everybody was a star except for me, frankly. And, you know, the evening ended with Carrie Fisher having a crise de nerve and throwing everybody out of the house. And that seemed right as well. But, you know, I get that the Oscars ceremonial is frankly a vicarious version of that. It's an opportunity to rub up against these people. And yeah, but it is the luster that comes, you know, America in particular, but it applies here in Europe as well. There was a period between, say, 1920 and 1950 when cinema was king and queen and God and the devil. You know, the size of the screen, the power of the medium, the lack of any other competing media as well made it. And I'm sorry, it's that luster still that is slowly fading with, you know, throughout our era. I don't think, you know, think about these scandals. Think about, you know, the transcripts of Jimmy Depp and Paul Bettany's text messages about Amber Heard, how disgusting that material is, and how, you don't have to be a devout reader of Kenneth Anger's Hollywood Babylon. And remember, that was just one sordid little paperback. For many years, the only kind of down and dirty you could get on Hollywood was this one little book, you know. And no more can the studios confect stars into being these extraordinary demigods and demigodesses. It just doesn't work anymore. So surely when we watch the ceremony, we're looking for pratfalls that are just waiting to happen, because we know these people have feet of clay.
This is, oh boy, our audience is just like, wow. But this is great. I love this perspective is unique. And I'm sure I will be thinking of you as I still watch this year's Oscars. Will, I promise. I think you should too. I just, for the sake of argument, I'm gonna.
Right. But just remember this, guys, in my time zone, it starts about 1 a.m. and ends about 4.
You know, if you're lucky, it ends at 4.
Right, but you really have to be dedicated to want to do that, right? You know, you would have to believe that a little bit of stardust would somehow be sprinkled on you from the screen, you know.
I practice my speeches in the mirror, and my speeches are all just listing everyone who's ever been unkind to me. It's a takedown, really, as opposed to a thanks. Will, I'm so grateful that you took the time all in the middle of, or late in London time, to join us and talk about this today. It's been fun and funny, and I am very grateful to you. I'm also grateful to everyone who tuned in. Join us next week. We're going to take an exciting twist from Oscar Talk to discussing a new resource for incarcerated people. Piper Kerman, author of Orange is the New Black, and PEN America's Kate Meichner will join us to talk about their new book, The Sentences That Create Us, Crafting a Writer's Life in Prison. That is Wednesday, February 16th at 12:30 Pacific time. Again, we're going to send you links to this interview, links to Will's articles in Alta. His website is Work Elsewhere, and anything else we talked about today. Again, Will Self, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much, Beth, and thanks everybody for tuning in.
Thanks all. Bye.